It is time for Southeastern Rewind's Tell Me More. Hey, y'all, I'm David Summers with the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller answering 5 questions from the latest Studcast now on Ron's homepage on YouTube. The 5 questions on this edition of Tell Me More come from Studcast episode number 8 called Wrestling's Torch is Lit. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind as well. Hey, Stud, you are killing it on the Southeastern Rewind channel on YouTube. The content is growing every day. You have literally created a place for Stud fans and Southeastern fans together, and that is so cool.
Yeah. That was my hopes and wishes from the very beginning that we would be able to accomplish that, and we're in the process now of getting started. We've been utilizing the original archived Studcast from number 1. Right now, we're obviously at number 8. We're answering questions on number 8, and we're looking forward to start adding fairly soon in the future, man. The actual TV shows. Hopefully, I think we're going to start with USA Wrestling that came out of 1988. We'll have 25 of those shows. And then we'll back up and go back hopefully to 1980 or so and start picking up Southeastern Pensacola shows. It's really exciting, man. It's a lot of work, Fans out there, I don't know if they have any idea how much work it is to getting this all done and piecing this all together. But we're doing our best, and I hope everybody's enjoying it. And I'm really pleased with what's happening, Dave. Early on here, I mean, our subscription numbers are just popping up every time I look.
Yeah.
We're about to reach that magical number of 1,000 subscribers. Yeah. In which we become what's considered kind of more mainstream, fairly big time, and we're within a couple of hundred of reaching that number, and that's pretty amazing, and no longer than we have been on here, and so really looking forward to it, and I love these shows that we're about to do, man. These have become really fun for me, and I think you too, and I know we got 5 more today, and heck. I'm always, just ready and waiting on hearing this. What is the questions for today? Because heck, I love talking about it. So heck, if you're ready, my man, I guess I'm saying I'm ready for question number 1. Who the hell is talking to us here?
Ron, you're always ready. That's the thing that amazes me. I've never heard you use the word retire or take a nap or say anything like that. You're always so very busy. So you're ready to get right to it.
I am, my man. Heck yeah.
All right, let's knock it out. All right, question number 1. Abraham Johnson asked, how would Roy have handled what Vince Jr. did in the 1980s?
Wow. I love that right off the bat, man. Jeez. I got a picture of my granddad and Vince Jr. standing side by side instantly, man. What a great question. And I got to assume, what Vince did in the 1980s. Well, Vince did a whole lot of things in the 1980s. But I have a feeling that Abraham was his name. I have a feeling that Abraham may be referring to Vince breaking kayfabe and letting the whole world know that wrestling wasn't for real,
Mm-hmm.
So I assume that's where I'm going to answer it anyway, Abraham. I mean, that's really what struck me instantly when I heard your question here. So, and I'm assuming that we're talking about Vince's breaking kayfabe in the 1980s, and it was my opinion the end of wrestling is people my age knew it. I mean, wrestling was over. I mean, wow, when he did that, I mean, there'd been a lot of wrestlers and there'd been a lot of other people that had gone on different platforms and said, wrestling isn't real. But, when Vince Jr., the most powerful promoter in wrestling, goes on, on a platform that he knows is going to be transmitted around the darn world, and says it, wow. For one of the most powerful promoters in the world to do it, it's like, I remember I was shocked. I was like, "Are you kidding me? Did he just do that?" You know, so as far as how Roy would have handled it, well, that probably depended a lot, I'd say, on Roy and whether Roy and Vince Jr. knew each other at all. Whether Roy had ever come face to face with him after he heard this announcement that Vince made. You know, so and I wouldn't have wanted to be in Vince McMahon Jr.'s shoes, man. I tell you, if I ran into Roy after saying those things, and in my mind's eye, Dave, I get this picture real quick of Roy with his hand gripped around Vince Jr.'s throat and his thumb kind of buried in his Adam's
Oh no!
apple,
Oh no!
and old Vince's eyes bulging out of his head like a cartoon,
Don't.
like about to pop.
Yeah.
So, I think that would be a little bit of the way that my granddad would have approached it. I know that back in my granddad's day, you just breaking kayfabe was just something that it was serious, and at the very least, if you did that, you got the hell beat out of you, and maybe more, by some people, and guys like my granddad who had come up, been trained by somebody as mean as the old original Dutch Mantel, and having his ribs broke and his wrist broke and all the other things that Dutch Mantel did to him before he ever told him what wrestling was all about. When you get that type of education and any business, a painful education, I guess is a good way of putting that, man. You get a lot of pain out of those broken bones, and you got to be really committed to go back to it again. And boy, in the old days, wrestlers were really serious about their business, and you couldn't even say anything to somebody. You couldn't even say, fans. Gosh, I remember back in my southeastern territories, Knoxville and Pensacola, fans were really, really putting themselves in harm's way, man, to just walk up to a wrestler and say, "Hey, that's all fake." It wasn't a good thing to do, and having the biggest promoter in the world, this it popped out of his mouth like it wasn't nothing to it. It's a bad deal, and Abraham, I can kind of understand. Having done these first 5 episodes on Roy, and you've gotten a feel for what kind of guy Roy was. That's a great question, and I guess the only way I can answer it is that little cartoon I see in my head, man. and that I'm having a hard time saying I wouldn't like to really see it in real life. But thank you, Abraham. That's a good question to start with today.
All right, there you go. Question number 2. Beverly Davis says, we have heard of Andre's drinking and eating adventures, but what about his lady adventures? Any good Andre and the girls at the matches stories? Or do we want to hear these, Stud?
I'm glad, and this is a lady, Beverly. Obviously, she's a lady, and I'm glad she didn't refer to some of these girls in the terms that they became known as in wrestling. She at least says, did the girls have any stories about Andre and the girls? Well, I'll tell you what. I got 2 of them that pop into my head real quick. When Andre and I were just meeting, this was when probably his second trip to Florida in maybe 1973, probably 73 or 74. And we spent the night in a hotel together in Jacksonville, Florida. And we wrestled there on a Thursday night. And then I drove him from there to Tallahassee to wrestle on Friday. And then from Tallahassee, we went back to Tampa, and I think he flew out after that. But it was just Andre and I. And Andre was telling me, and I guess we kind of got on this subject a little bit, And I said, Andre, do you ever have dates? And I don't think he was single at this point. And I said, do you ever have dates? Or do you meet girls on the road? And he says, no, Ron. Big old Andre voice in there, and I said, well, how about if I tried to set you up with somebody? We were in a nightclub, and naturally it's after the matches, and Andre, she's already mentioned his drinking, and he was famous for his drinking, and we were drinking, me and him, and
Okay.
and he says, yeah, Ron, I'd like to meet a lady, and I say, okay. This was back when Andre had the big old afro hairstyle.
Yeah.
I mean, he's already 7'2",
I
7'3",
was
or
gonna say,
whatever,
yeah,
and
this
now he's
made it.
got 4 inches of hair on top
Yeah,
of that.
yeah, added to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the big beard to go with it, man. He looked like wow, he was as close to a Bigfoot as you could
Yeah.
get.
He actually,
He would have made a great Bigfoot.
yeah,
I
he
tell
actually
you.
played one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So he looked like a walking Bigfoot, and I remember I said, "Okay, Andre, I'm going to go and take a little walk here, and I'll see what I can do." I remember going to tables that have girls. There'd be 3 or 4 girls there, and then and I would introduce myself, and they weren't too horrified of me, you know. But then I said, I got a friend, and he's a big guy, but he has a little trouble meeting girls, and could would do y'all think that you might like to meet him? Would you mind if I bring him over? And they say, naturally, well, where is he? Right. And then and Andre always liked to sit in the corner, man. He didn't want to be in the middle of the things. He wanted to be kind of back out of the way and people
Mm-hmm.
not notice him very much. And
Yeah.
so he's sitting back in the corner. And wow, he stands out, man. Even sitting down, he looks like he's standing up almost. And the girls say, well, where is he? And I point back there and I say, he's right back there. And they go, oh my God. All of them, the reaction was the same for every one of them. It's like, oh, no, no, no. If he'd have been standing up, I think they would have turned their chairs over or something. But as it was, they just, were polite about it. And then I went through the whole club, man. And I never found anybody that would have any interest in Andre. So the only other story, it has to do with the time we flew from. Actually, it was the night that Southeastern Wrestling opened in Dothan, Alabama, in 1978. It was my birthday, March the 3rd, 1978, and we were opening up my second territory. And Andre was with me. He had been with me for 3 days in Knoxville, and he had the last day was a shot that I said, I'm going to book him in opening night in Dothan, Alabama, in the old farm center building you're very familiar with, man. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we go on a plane. We go on a little plane ride. We get up early in the morning in Knoxville, and we get on a plane, and we have to take a small jet that takes us into Atlanta, and then we get on another small jet from Atlanta to Dothan. Andre can't hardly even sit in the first class section because the seats it's a smaller jet, and he doesn't fit anyway, but he sits by the window. Well, let me just add to the story a little bit. While we're in the Atlanta airport, he's been drinking all night and partying like always after the matches were over. I don't know how many hours of sleep he got, but he wanted to go to sleep in the Atlanta airport, and he bought a newspaper, and he told me, he says, Ron, I want to put this paper over my face, and he says, I don't let anybody bother me. So I was like, oh, whatever Andre tells you, you ain't going to say no, Andre. I ain't going to do it. But so, anyway, he opens the paper full length and he puts it over his face. Kind of covers his face and part of his chest. But so then he lays down, he sits back in a chair, and he's all relaxed, and he goes to sleep pretty quickly. And then the guy comes along, and he's going to come over, and he notices, God, that's Andre the Giant, right? And he starts to touch him, and I say, hey, leave him alone. No, he goes to me. He goes, that's Andre. That's Andre. He goes, I want to talk to him. And I said, I don't care, man. You ain't going to talk to him. I said, leave him alone. Just go on down the tarmac there. Go on down the catch your plane. Anyway, he can't take no for an answer. So finally, I just said, well, it's up. He do your thing, man. And so he taps Andre on the shoulder. And Andre doesn't do anything. He taps him again. Then he kind of almost hits him on the arm. And Andre says, he's mad, and he says, go away. And the paper flew about a foot up in the air like a cartoon off his face and floated back down, right? And that guy took off running like crazy. So we get on the plane. And so Andre sits by the window, and I sit in the seat next to him. And I'm like hanging out in the aisle because his shoulders are so wide. He's pushing me out in the aisle. And the stewardess keeps coming back and forth, and I know she's looking at him, right? And finally, after, she gets a drink served and whatever, and she got a little time, she comes by and she squats down by me. And she's looking at his hands, right? And she says to me, she goes, wow. She goes, look at his hands. And I go, yeah, they're pretty big, right? And they were massive. I mean, Andre's ring finger, he could put a silver dollar through his ring finger. So, that's the size of one finger, and she's like, wow, gosh. And so I said, take a look at those 25s. And she looks down there, and his feet are just huge. His whole body was huge, obviously, And she got embarrassed. She got red in the face, real red in the face. And I said, what are you thinking? Oh, she jumped up, man, and she took off. She never came back by, I don't think. Or when she did, she certainly didn't look at me anymore. But, Beverly, I think her name was, Andre. I never saw Andre with a woman. Seriously, in all that time. And I just think his size he was just so big. It just, women weren't really attracted to him. I think they were mostly scared of him, man. So that's kind of my answer, Beverly.
And maybe a pop note or little known fact note. Andre did play Bigfoot on $6 Million Man somewhere back in the 70s. So one of his TV appearances. So there you go. All right, let's go to number 3. Harry Moore says, do you know what happened to Ron Wright's chisel? Was he buried with it, or is it in a museum somewhere, a wrestling museum, or who knows, a Tennessee museum of some kind? Any idea?
Geez, man. Yeah, what a crazy question there, man. Harry, gosh, I assume, Harry, you've seen the chisel, it's an ugly thing. And especially it's got all that dried blood on it from no telling how many men, how many people, pretty scary little deal just to take a look at it, So, and boy, Ron Wright he was in love with that thing. It was kind of his trademark. He was famous for it. It was the only chisel I ever saw. I guess I have to say that. Thank goodness not everybody ran around with a chisel in their tights, but and the name was so appropriate. They could have called it the gimmick, or the pounder, or the cutter, or whatever. But that word chisel, man, it was perfect. I don't know who came up with that. I'd like to know that one myself. That'd be a question for Ron, is who gave you the name the chisel. So anyway, Ron, took that sucker to every territory he went. And first time I ever met him was in the Florida territory in the early '70s, and he brought the chisel with him and his brother Donnie, and for 2 weeks, and they ended up keeping his promise. He ended up keeping his promise. Before he left there, he hit somebody with it, and all of us boys down there in Florida got the chance to see something akin to a Tennessee dog whooping. I mean, he was a true freak down there, and everybody was like, "What is he doing with that thing?" So and I don't know. I do know the answer to this question actually, because I have a good friend that lives up there in that area, and kind of got us. Ron Wright had everybody that was around that Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol, Tennessee area, the Tri-Cities it's called, up in the northeastern part of Tennessee. If you were a wrestler or wanted to be a wrestler, a referee, you had any association with wrestling, Ron Wright was the guy you went to for everything. He knew everybody. He knew all the answers to all the questions. And old Ron was he was king when it came to that type of thing. And Bo James was a young guy. About the time I left Knoxville and went to Pensacola, he was just beginning in wrestling. And he's still out there doing it today. In fact, I think he had a match last night somewhere in the Tri-City areas. He's still promoting, and he's got matches going on. And Bo told me one time, he said, when Ron died, he said Ron's son took the chisel. And and he says, as far as he knew, that Ron's son still had that original chisel. I don't think they ever made another one. I didn't see much reason that they would have. I mean, that one was so famous. I mean, why would you want? I guess it got to be for some guys a badge of honor. To get popped by the chisel.
Yeah.
Strangely enough,
Yeah.
right? Can you
Yeah.
imagine that, Dave? I mean,
Yeah.
there were some
Yeah.
young guys running around that, saw it,
Yeah.
and you could almost see it in their eyes. They're like, wow,
Yeah.
I could get hit with that thing.
I went down to Ron Wright's chisel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, man.
Yeah.
But Ron Wright is he's one of the greatest characters in the history of wrestling, I think. I got a Super Studcast. I think it's number 2, as a matter of fact, that really is it's solid Ron Wright stories. I mean, it tells you what Ron Wright was all about. And contrary to what a lot of people would think, he was no dummy. He flew his own airplane. He owned his own airplane, and he could fly that sucker too, if you had guts enough to fly with him. And he was a pretty smart guy. And so great at what he did, had such monumental heat that speaking of his airplane, one night in Harlan, Kentucky, they shoved it off the mountain and it burned.
Oh, wow.
So he lost an airplane to wrestling fans that were so mad at him. They found his plane and shoved it off the mountain, and there it was when he came to get to fly at the bottom of the mountain on fire.
Wow. And a credit to you, Stud. Now, we never saw him in the Dothan area, and correct me if I'm wrong, even the Pensacola area. He always stayed in that Tennessee area. But you have brought him to life for folks that never knew of Ron Wright and his chisel. You've really brought him to life, as you said, since early on in the beginning of Studcast and Super Studcast.
Well, he's the type of guy that, to me, he deserves it. He's such a tremendous character for the business that to anybody who likes to tell stories, and you around Ron Wright long enough, you'll get a lot of stories. I can tell you that. And I love Ron Wright. To be honest with you, in a way, I really loved him. He was a part of Tennessee wrestling.
That's cool.
Always will be.
One of the cool guys who put a lot of butts in seats and made a lot of people laugh and have a lot of fun at the matches. All right, question number 4. Oscar Langston asks, you talk about Roy's 12 states a lot. What were those states? I assume some might have been partial states he shared with promoters like the Crockett's, the Funks, and even Vince Sr. What were the 12 states?
Oh boy. Well, they were all pretty much in the South. I can go through them. I hope I'm going to get all 12 here. Obviously he started it all in Tennessee, and then he was in Kentucky. He branched out toward the east. He was in Virginia. He ran towns in West Virginia, God, which was a long way from Dyersburg, Tennessee to West Virginia. He ran in Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana and Mississippi, in Alabama, in the Florida Panhandle. He touched Florida. He ran matches in Georgia, and he ran Evansville, Indiana. He ran in Indiana, one town in Indiana. And I think I don't know how many that was, but it's got to be close to 12. So he had an extensive area in which he was running wrestling. There was no doubt about that. And since you're asking about the states in which he kind of shared these towns, some cities, with other promoters, there was a great deal of overlap in territories back in Roy's time, Roy's time was before there was a lot of territories, back in those days, there were very few promoters in the entire country when Roy started. So, fewer promoters always meant less controversy. Obviously, you're not going to have a problem if you ain't got many of them out there. And who's going to complain about you running some town when, you've got more towns to run? If you got 12 states, how can you say, I don't want you running, Nashville, Tennessee, because you've got, with 12 states like that, pieces of 12 states, he had hundreds of cities to run his wrestling matches in. So, before TV was invented, most promoters, they'd go anywhere they wanted to. And especially when it came to the small cities, most promoters, they respected the other promoters' main cities. You didn't go into St. Louis, Missouri and run that under Sam Muchnick's face, but you could go to a little Poplar Bluff, Missouri, or some of those towns like that over by the Mississippi River, and Sam ain't going to care. So there were occasional wars, guys got it, but there was so little competition way back in those days, and there were so many huge markets that there weren't a lot of squabbles between promoters way back. So there wasn't a problem when you ran somebody into somebody else's state. Now, when TV wrestling came along, situation kind of changed some. The stations you were on, if you went out and got these stations and put your program on, and the cities their signals went into, that kind of started to designate the area where you were considered on. Back in Roy's day, before TV, there weren't any clear lines about you couldn't go this part of Virginia or that part of Virginia. But once TV came and you started putting your television programs on television stations, you kind of used where their signals went as a boundary for your territory and your operation. So, I really think that was kind of a good way to divide the country because it made a little sense. If you had the TV, then you should probably have the rights to run the cities that are covered by that television station. So those promoters with connections and the ability to get to TV stations became the big time promoters. That kind of meant that guys who set up the TV station relationships they usually had to be a pretty intelligent guy. You had to be kind of impressive when you went into a TV station if you wanted to get on there. And, and if you were that type of guy, intelligent and fairly impressive, and you had the knowledge and experience and the ability to go and get on somebody's television station, then you're probably qualified to run a wrestling company. So, So territories really began to develop, in 1948. Just happens to be about the same year that television was invented, and it was the same time that the National Wrestling Alliance was formed in 1948. And Roy happened to be one of those few original members, and he was surrounded in the South by other NWA promoters, and most of which, like Roy, had been wrestlers long before they ever started promoting. Uh, Cowboy Luttrell in Florida, as an example. Paul Jones, the original Paul Jones, not the Paul Jones from Carolina fame, who came along a long time after the original. Paul Jones in Georgia. Leroy McGurk out there in Oklahoma. Those were guys that were promoters that owned territories. I think part of these were probably original NWA members. And, obviously, Roy had a relationship. He was an original member of the NWA himself. So they weren't going to complain if you ran their small towns. They wouldn't have cared about it at all. And there were other promoters, that had never wrestled, but were still very successful promoters. One of them was Sam Muchnick, I mentioned, in St. Louis. He went on to be the president of the NWA for many, many years. He was not a wrestler, never in his life, but he certainly knew how to run wrestling promotion. Jim Crockett Sr. in the Carolinas, never wrestled, but darn sure was a businessman, and he could go into television stations and get on their TV stations. He was a sharp dude. And Jim Barnett. He ran towns in Kentucky and Indiana, just in the northern part of where Roy was running towns. And I doubt that they ever had words, because there was so many cities and so many places you could run your wrestling that, back in those days, it was kind of like a gentleman's business in those days. And as the sport grew, the gentleman began to fade away. Sadly, by the 1990s, I don't think there was any gentleman anymore in wrestling.
Really? So no more. My word is my bond. No more handshakes.
Yeah. No. But that by then it became all theft.
Yeah,
all favor.
Wow. Okay.
Your territory's mine, just like my territory's mine.
Yeah.
So it became a bad situation. But for the gentleman, Oscar, I think was his name.
Yep.
Oscar, Roy ran in a lot of different states, and he never had really any problems during all the times that he ran in those states, and because the business was so different than what it is nowadays.
Yeah. So eventually it moved to what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. There you go.
That's it.
All right. Number 5, David Croft. If you got to pick your last name in wrestling, what would it have been?
That's a pretty darn good one too, and I assume he's talking about the name Fuller, right? And and for darn sure I didn't get to select that name, that's for certain, and I don't know David Croft. That's a nice name, David. I don't know if you know how I got to be named Fuller, but, pretty strange little deal there. My dad substituted for somebody in the town one night, and he didn't want to be a Welch because there were already 4 Welches in the business. And the guy says, "What's your name?" And on that card that night, there was a substitute, and they'd already asked Dad, hey, there's a guy here supposed to be here named Buddy Fuller, and he didn't show up, and so, but Dad says, I'm Buddy Fuller. Pretty strange way for me to get a last name of Fuller, man, for all my wrestling career. But that's kind of the way it happened. It was pretty darn simple little deal, And he asked me what name would I have liked to have if I hadn't had the name of Fuller.
Right.
And that's pretty simple, really. I don't know why the hell Dad didn't want to be a Welch. I mean, if Roy and Herb and Lester those type of wrestlers were named Welch, and then they were as good as those guys were and had as many fans as they had. I don't know why he wanted to take another name anyway. I mean, why not ride that horse? You know, I mean, it's already up and running, and it's as fast a horse as there is out there. You know, why wouldn't you want to climb on there and say, I'm a Welch too, you know? But Dad was kind of a different guy. He wanted to become successful in his own right. And, you know, and I guess there's something to be said for that.
Right.
But when we started, Rob and I never, ever considered calling ourselves Ron Welch and Robert Welch. We were going to be a Fuller.
You be you kind of. Just you be who you are.
Yeah, I Ron Welch, I think, would have been just as successful in the ring as Ron Fuller.
Yeah,
you know?
I think it. Yeah, I think so.
So you know, it's what's in a name anyway. You know, it's just a name. So you know, but crazy good questions today, Dave. I really enjoy these shows.
Absolutely. All right, well done. And as we get ready to.
Yeah, before we get out of here again, we're missing another name here, man.
Are you serious?
What did we miss?
We're missing old Walk, man. I believe out in Australia, man.
Yeah, we can't go a show. You know, we can't go an entire show.
Great questions. You know?
Right.
Yeah. So you know, and then you know, he's always kind of chimed into this show, and I'm wondering if what's his deal? What's his deal today? If he hadn't gotten in touch with us, I might have to check up on Walk, man. You know, I mean, he might be sick or something.
Okay, I did hear from him on Facebook. He wanted to know why Lily hasn't been made the official mascot of the YouTube channel yet. So that's what Walk wanted to know.
Well, I think we kind of discussed that. We got into that. We didn't actually. I didn't actually say anything about whether that was going to happen or not. You know, wow, that's kind of an odd deal in a way. But you know, Walk's that Walk out there in Australia, man. He's a little bit different dude, man. You know. Yeah, Aussies, I guess, you know, they got a right to be. They're in one of the most beautiful countries on the planet, and you know, I think I'm going to go ahead and say to Walk here, you know, I'm going to go ahead and let Lily become an official mascot of my YouTube channel. I mean,
wow. Okay.
I didn't know that YouTube channels had to have a mascot.
Yeah, but
by golly, if we got to, she's a pretty little dog. She's in a beautiful country, and she's owned by a guy who's, I'm wondering about sometimes, but it's sure got good questions, man.
As soon as we finish this Studcast update here on this Tell Me More, I'm headed to get a tattoo of Lily. So
me too.
Yeah, I'm that committed.
Well, you're a little more committed, I think, than I am, Dave.
All right. I was going to suggest a restraining order, but he is halfway around the world, so we won't bother with that on this.
I don't know if there are international restraining orders.
All right, Stud. Good job this week. There it is, another Southeastern Rewinds Tell Me More, where the Stud Ron Fuller answers 5 questions about Studcast number 8 this week, which is now on Ron's new home on YouTube. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on his YouTube channel. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. When you go to YouTube, put in Southeastern Rewind. For Ron Fuller, I'm David Summers. We'll be back soon with another Tell Me More.